Let's have fun making some watercolor flowers. You can get a basic watercolor set at the dollar store. So the supplies you'll need: a brush, which most likely comes with your kit, and then you can also mix on the lid as your palette. And then of course you'll need paper towels to dab up any mistakes, and then clean water. As this is watercolor, of course you need clean water, and your watercolor paper. If you don't have watercolor paper, try to find a paper that is heavier in weight. Okay, so let's begin by mixing our colors in the palette. So I'll mix a little bit of orange with the red and a lot of water. Again, these are watercolors, so don't forget to add a lot of water. And you want to start out working very light and then build your colors as you go. So if you're doing a wash and you have mostly water and a little bit of color, that's the best way to start. Also, I'm very new to watercolor, so I have been watching a wonderful woman on YouTube named Shayda Campbell, and this is a technique that I learned from watching her. So you start out with small spirals using the tip of your brush, and you want to think about this not as a rose, but more as a spiral that gets thicker as it goes out. That's one of the things that I learned from watching Shayda's videos, and then here you are watching me. These are very fun and free-flowing, so while you're working on it, don't focus on perfection and realism. Just keep working your brush and have fun as you're making each petal. As the petals get further from the center, I want to add more yellow so they lighten as they get further away. So as you can see here, I'm using the tip of the brush and then the entire bristles of the brush to make each petal thicker, and then back to the tip to make it thinner. And then you can always go back and darken an area if it's too light by adding more. But with watercolor, it's very difficult to remove the watercolor. As the artist, you have creative freedom, of course, so you can make your rose as large or as small as you'd like. So at this point, if you wanted to stop, that's perfectly fine. And if you wanted to make your rose larger, like I'm doing, you can just continue adding petals and making them larger and larger with each spiral as it goes further from the center. Now looking at my rose, there are some areas that I'd like to go in and darken. So I'll add some more color to my brush and then go back in and darken any areas that look a little too light. Now it's time to add some leaves. I like to mix the green with a little bit of blue. I'd also recommend maybe mixing a little bit of brown, up to you. And then you can place your leaves wherever you'd like. Make sure again you go thick and thin with your brush because leaves vary in size. And you can also have 2 or 3 or 1. Again, you get to use creative freedom and put the leaves wherever you'd like. Another technique I like to use is adding water first and drawing the shape of the leaf, and then going back in and putting little droplets of color and letting them organically take shape. Now I'm going to add another flower that's a very different style from the rose, just something cute and little with a few petals. I'm going to add 5 petals here, and as you can see the color is darker, so that way you can see the difference between the 2 flowers. I will add another one up here, but this one, instead of looking at it straight on, we'll look at it from the side. So I'll just draw 3 petals from a side view. And now I'll add some green leaves to these smaller flowers. And now to create the illusion of space, I'll do some overlapping by adding another rose behind the two smaller flowers. And when I'm finished with this rose, I'll also add a third rose, again creating more dimension, following the same steps as I did with the first rose. These roses will be a little bit lighter because I want them to be further away. Now I'm going to add another variation of a flower, and I'm using more purple in this one and mixing a little bit of red with the purple and making some nice petals that I can go in later and add details. Again, I'm starting out very light and then can add in, and I'm overlapping, so these flowers are going behind some of the leaves, they can go in front of some of the flowers, again creating some really nice dimension. So now I'm going to start the last variation of flower. It's using mostly purple, and I'm starting off by adding lots of little dots close together, and as they get further away from the base of that cluster, they're getting lighter and spread out a little bit further apart. And I'm placing them just kind of wherever I feel like it would be a nice addition to make for a good composition. So I have them on the edge there, and now I'm going to put them in the center, and then again slowly just kind of making tiny little circles that get further apart, and then I'm going to touch up some areas, add a little bit more paint. So now I want to add some more defined leaves coming off here. So I'm overlapping the larger leaf from the rose and adding a smaller line with some smaller leaves. It's also much darker, as you can see. That layer had time to dry, so it's creating a nice crisp leaf. If that layer were still wet, it would start to fan out. And of course, if you want that look, that's great too. And if you want your lines to be more crisp, definitely wait for your paint to dry before going in and adding your extra layers of color. So now I'm just going to review my piece and see where I'd like to add any detail, make any areas darker, add some more shadow, add any detail within the flowers. And you can do this to the level that I do or take it even further and add more details and more shadows. Again, that's up to you. All right, hopefully it was fun painting some flowers. I wanted to show you what it looked like not on watercolor paper, and then I went over and tried to do some lettering to make a card with a Sharpie, and as you can see, it kind of bleeds a little bit because it's not watercolor paper, but still came out pretty good. So if you don't have watercolor paper, don't worry about it, and if you have a marker and it's not a Sharpie, this is what it will turn out like. And remember to check the Google Classroom for steps and if you'd like to post your project.